welcome to episode 19 of Shankism. This is the early Middle Ages. Alrighty, let's get right into it. Early Middle Ages were also known as the Medieval Ages, and this period lasts from around 500 to 1000 AD. Right? Some medieval pictures here. Okay, castles and knights and monks and so forth. So you do want to write all these down. So the early Middle Ages is going to have the heritage of Rome. So it's going to have some of the old Roman Empire in it. And it really transitions from a really great Roman Empire that had everything. When Rome falls apart, it's like the fragments, some pieces are trickled in. Okay, some of that heritage lasts. And you can kind of see that throughout this lesson. So there's a heritage of Rome. They have like the Roman DNA in them. 2, Roman Catholic Church. This is going to be the center of all the Middle Ages. People, this institution, people will gravitate towards the Roman Catholic Church. So the church doesn't die. You know, if America falls tomorrow, people just aren't going to stop believing in Christianity. Okay, they'll still live in the same spot, but they'll still keep their religion. They just won't be ruled by America. The third thing here, the customs of the Germans, and really the Germanic tribes is just a catch-all phrase for anybody that is basically north of Italy. So you could be in what we know as Germany, or you could be in France, or Scandinavia, or even in England. Just they're referred to as the Germans. Okay. So those are the 3 things. So after Rome fell in 476, which we have already gone over, 2 Germanic tribes, which were technically the Ostrogoths, where did people migrate? Because there were Roman citizens that in these places, and they were protected under what was left of the Roman Empire, but now there is no more Roman Empire. There's still old Roman citizens, but they're not protected anymore. Okay, you know, like I said, if America fell, we would no longer be protected by America. People would still be there, but they're on their own now. It's, you know, it's like the purge basically in Europe. So things to think about, things to write down are the ones in purple. So after the fall in 476 AD, about 1500 years ago, disruption of trade. Right? Trade stops basically. There's not a whole lot of trade going on in Western Roman Empire because it's not there anymore. Right? Merchants feared the invaders were afraid to travel. They were afraid they were going to get like mugged on the sideline or mugged on the street, basically. So they didn't trade really in Western Europe, and there were better places to trade. They went to Constantinople. Fall of the cities. The lack of trade and support caused cities to be abandoned. So you have cities like London and Paris, and that were founded by the Romans, just abandoned. Like they went from, you know, thousands and thousands of people living there to basically next to nothing. No one living there. Eventually, they'll obviously go back, and people will, you know, refound those cities. But they were originally Roman cities, but you had to found them again after the Roman Empire fell. Population shifts, meaning that people are moving to different locations. They're moving out of the cities because the cities are not the center anymore. Rural areas are. It would be like if everyone moved out of DC and they went to all the rural areas in Virginia and just spread out, okay, evenly. So as trade declined, cities collapsed. People fled to the countryside. So you have old Roman citizens mixing in with the Germanic people that are all throughout Europe, all things you see in that map. Most of Europe became rural farming societies. So they went back to their roots. They went back to what they knew best, which was farming in rural areas, basically self-sustaining themselves. It becomes extremely rural. Rural means they're just spread out. It's not like urban where it's like more densely populated. They're all spread out. So you have a lot of these people now that there's no more education. You know, like I said, it's the purge. People aren't worried about education. They're worried about survival and, you know, protecting themselves and growing crops. So they're not worried about education. So education completely falls off in Western Europe. Byzantine Empire in the East, they're thriving. They're doing well for themselves. But you have a lot of illiterate people that just legitimately can't read, can't write. The ones that could would be the church. Okay, the Catholic Church, the monks and so forth, they obviously need to read because they're going to be reading the Bible and copying the Bible and other religious manuscripts. So what language was lost and what languages spawned? I think you know what language was lost. Is that right? Yeah, that's Latin. You got it right. Congratulations, class. It's Latin. That language kind of disappears. Now, it's still maintained in the Catholic Church. You know, to this day, the Pope and the cardinals and the clergy in Vatican City know Latin, but it's their primary language that in that city itself. But that's a small, small city inside of Rome, the city today, that's owned by the Catholic Church, as we talked about before. All right, but no other country in the world their main language is not Latin, but it used to be basically the only language. That's like right now, most of the, I won't say most of the world, like half the world speaks English, okay? And then imagine within 500 years from now, no one spoke English. And the only people that spoke English were like hardcore Christians. But the reason that there's going to be different languages and these languages sound similar, as you see up there, and you should write Latin's the mother language, and you'll write Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian are all Romance languages, not because they're so romantic and how they sound. That's not why. It's because they're uniquely Roman. What happens is, as the Roman citizens push out all to rural areas in Europe, they go to different Germanic tribes, and these different Germanic tribes speak a different version of German. And then when these two mix in together, we get Spanish. When that Spanish area, when the Germanic tribes in the French area or the France area, Latin, and these Germanic tribes mix, you get French. You get the theme here: Portuguese, Italian, Romanian. These languages all sound very similar. They have maybe different pronunciations and different spellings, but they do sound very similar. And it's because they're Romance languages, and it's because Latin is the primary language that it comes from. So if you know Latin, one, it will help you out in any science class, especially if you further your science degrees, because a lot of the science terms are in Latin. Same thing with math, some of the math terms as well, but specifically law. Like those three, there's a lot of Latin terms that are scattered in throughout, and you know that, you'll know other language, you'll be able to decipher it. Mr. Woods took Latin classes, and he knew a good deal of Latin. He could, any one of those languages, he could pretty much decipher. Okay, but yeah, these are all. Spanish is a Romance language. French is a Romance language. Portuguese is a Romance language. Italian is a Romance language, and Romanian is a Romance language. I think that one's kind of easy. So the years following, between the 400 and 600 CE or AD, of what you prefer, Roman Empire fell, but Europe was very fragmented, meaning that it was like little pocket kingdoms everywhere. You know, here's the little Germanic kingdom here, and here's a Frankish kingdom here, and a Balt kingdom, and a Lombard kingdom, all, and Swedes and Norse and Finns and Celts and Picts and British, and all these different kingdoms arise. But there's no unified, because if you look at this map, at one point, all of this was Rome. All Rome controlled it all, but not anymore. You can see on the map on the lower right-hand corner, Eastern Roman Empire. This is the Byzantines. They're still around, okay, at this point. So the establishment kingdoms from the barbarian tribes makes a shift. They go from authority of like one emperor or one authority to local lords, like small lords, like they said, these pocket kingdoms or pocket lords. Warriors held allegiance to a lord rather than a state, meaning than a government. So it's like, think about like owning, or your allegiance is to your landlord and not to it like the U.S. government. Like whatever your landlord says to do, you follow, not the government, because there is no more government. All right. The only surviving institution, and whatever what institution means, is the Catholic Church, and I mentioned that earlier. It's just because Rome fell doesn't mean that the church fell as well. So largely the only people, and I said this early, the clergy, which we know that means like all the people that make up the Catholic Church, were literate. And we know literate means able to read and able to write, right? They're the only ones. The problem with that, though, is that when you only have one small group of people being able to read and write, they can tell you whatever they want and you'll believe it. If you can't read or write anything for yourself, especially read anything for yourself, I could tell you that the boogeyman is real. I could tell you that Santa is real, and you would believe it. Okay? Because you would just think, well, these people are the people that hold all the knowledge. They must be telling the truth. That's why you have to go for multiple sources, even in the internet, even from me. Like I'm a good source, but I'm not the only source. Fact check me. All right. I'm not trying to give you any lies, but I could make a mistake, and maybe I have made mistakes. Okay. But that's one thing that was troublesome during this period, as you'll see, when one entity or one institution controls all the knowledge. So let's talk about the Roman Catholic Church. So it was starting to grow in power and influence and became more and more powerful, because when people were looking for safety and security, they no longer could get that from Rome. They could only get that from the institution of the church. So they looked to the church for guidance during this very dark and troublesome and violent time. So they're the only surviving institution, which you kind of already have, but it's a source of safety and security. Like I said, they're looking for some type of safety in the church, unification. Missionaries sought to spread Christianity to barbarian tribes. So there were still barbarian tribes that weren't Christian. Don't think that everyone was just all of a sudden Christian. Christianity took a long, slow 2020. Well, Christianity wasn't 2020. 2000, we'll say around 2000 years to be where it is now, right? And it's certain people during certain times, typically kings, adopting Christianity, and more people will follow. So these missionaries spread Christianity throughout these barbarian kingdoms up there as best they could. Early monasticism, these are the monks, monasteries. So they're dedicating themselves to prayer. They're transcribing religious texts. They're dedicating everything to illuminated manuscripts, which is what you see in the bottom right there. Illuminated, so it's like vibrant, very detailed, very artistic manuscripts. So not only do they have all of the Latin there and of maybe the Bible or some other religious manuscript, but they have the beautiful artwork. Okay, these are illuminated manuscripts. You will have to know that. Monasteries. Monasteries are religious communities. Okay, that's where they would go. That's where this is where the monks would go to practice, prayer and dedicate themselves to not, a woman or anything, dedicate themselves to God. So they would not get married, they would not have a family. They're just dedicating themselves to God. Sometimes it might be big, but other times it might be small. It might be just a small monastery in a rural area. Okay, but monks and nuns are going to be the ones that are in these monasteries. Okay, where they are devoting themselves completely to the church. But they're the ones going to be able to practice medicine, because they're going to be able to read up on what prior people have done and able to help you out. All right, so let's get to the Franks. The Franks are the first Germanic tribe to form a kingdom. Were the Franks. So there's a lot of Germanic tribes, but the big one here, the one that really forms, is the Franks, which they'll later become the French. The Franks settled in the area of Gaul. Who conquered Gaul? That's right, class. Julius Caesar. Way, way, way back in the 50s BC. Okay, it's modern day France, but they also called it Francia, which you obviously already will write down everything in purple. But Clovis was the first Frankish ruler to convert to Christianity. So because he converted, many other people start to convert as well. Okay, I believe it's a similar story. It's kind of like to Constantine. He was like looking for religions and looking to find a religion that would help him, aid him in a battle. Christianity helped, won the battle, converted to Christianity. I think his wife was also a Christian too. All right, that kind of helped. She kind of pushed him into Christianity. In turn, the church supported Clovis in the many military campaigns. The church is backing Clovis. Okay, yeah, go attack more of these pagans, these non-Christians. And he was endorsed by the king, by the church. endorsed as king. This is Clovis, the first Christian ruler of the Franks. That's what, think Clovis Christianity, okay, that C and C. So the empire you're looking at is, about half, a little bit more than half of modern day France. But what Clovis had, he had more than the northern, it's like that dark purple up there. That's more of what he had. And as the years go on, the Franks get a larger and larger empire. What you do need to write down is that he and his successors are called the Merovingians. So this is the Merovingian dynasty. Later on, as the story continues, because this Clovis was kind of, relatively immediately after Rome fell. This is, over 100 years after, almost getting close to 200 some years. I would say 150 years after Rome fell. We talked briefly about Charles Martell, but here he is again. So Charles Martell, also known as the Hammer, defeated the Moors in the Battle of Tours. In 732 AD. So this stops the Muslims from coming further into Europe and pushes them back into Spain. If he doesn't gather the forces, these farmers, and train them, and unite a lot of these Germanic tribes and say, listen, if we don't put down the Muslims here and now, Christianity is gone. Europe is for the Muslims then, for the taking. So that's a huge turning point in history. Battle of Tours, the Moors are defeated. Moors are Muslims who live in Spain. But I'm assuming you already knew that. Charles the Hammer. This is Pepin III. Pepin III is Charles Martell's son, also known as Pepin the Short. And Charles Martell was about 6'4", roughly, maybe. Pepin the Short, we don't know exactly if he was short or just shorter than his father, but keep in mind, most men are not tall at this time. Like an average height for a guy is like 5'11", 6 foot. Average height then is probably like 5'6", 5'7", maybe at best. So he might have been just shorter. He could have been like 6 foot, but he's still 4 inches shorter than his father. He's made king of the Franks. The Carolingian line of the rulers begins with him. It really technically. So you go from Merovingians with Clovis to Carolingians with Pepin. His father isn't technically a king, Charles Martell, not until his son comes in. Does he kind of take that role. And he gave land to Rome. And what that land is, and you want to write this down, that Pepin the Short, after Pope sought help against the Lombards, he defeats the Lombards and helps the Pope out. He gives them the Papal States. And what the Papal States are, if you look at this map, this is Italy. And the green, what you see, is where Rome is, and it's where Vatican City is, and it's a giant portion. Like, they don't own all that today. They own a very, 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 very small section of what is Rome today, or what is the Vatican City today, right? So, but that's set up for the next, couple hundred years of papal authority. So the Pope authority in that area in Italy. His son, Pepin III's son, is Charlemagne, however you need to say it, from 742 to 814 AD. So he died around 1200 years ago, or 1200 years ago, depending on your preference. What's important about him is what's in yellow. Yes, he's Pepin III's son, Pepin the Short. People also thought Pepin the Short just maybe had a short temper or a short haircut. 800 AD, Pope crowned him the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Right, 800 AD, technically on Christmas Day. All right, so December 25th, 800 AD, the Pope crowns him. And this is a big, huge moment in history because it's showing that the Pope is more powerful than kings, the biggest king at this time, because Charlemagne at this point owns Italy, France, and parts of Germany. It is very close. It's the closest they've been to a Roman Empire in, 325 years? So Charlemagne, the reason they kind of consider this, he appoints 350 counts to oversee counties. You remember like Count Chocula, Count Dooku, those counts, they're just basically like governors, right? Counts preside over counties, right? Like that'd be the guy in charge of a county. Like there's a count for King George, okay, of this King George County. He was also an advocate for education. He himself he could read, but he had trouble writing because kings didn't need to write. Why would a king need to write? The king, you have people just tell you all stuff, but he understood that the value in knowing stuff yourself, because those guys could still say anything they wanted. You'd have no idea. So he would personally read all the documents that are coming in so that he knew what was going on in his empire, not what people were telling him was going on. Like, oh, this is what so-and-so wrote. Well, what if that was wrong? So he didn't want to have that happen. So he started to do it himself. And plus, if he's pushing education, he should be educated. Okay, most kings are not educated. He was. So he's a huge advocate for education, trying to restore this Roman empire itself. Okay, because the Pope crowns him in it, and he's kind of living up to it, restoring education and building this big empire and building roads and all these things that Rome is doing. He's literally trying to pull the people out of the Dark Ages as much as he can. Like, get out of there, get out of this naiveness, get out of this loss of knowledge. After his death, though, his grandsons will split the kingdom because they couldn't really agree on it, so they split the kingdom into three. That was called the Treaty of Verdun. It's Charlemagne there, Charlemagne or Charlemagne. There's his empire, right? There's the empire, which you see in orange. It's, Byzantine Empire still owned like the very, very southern tip of Italy, yeah, and Sicily and so forth, but they're collapsing, all right, by this point too. But Charlemagne's empire is thriving. So he becomes a force in Western Europe, revives the Roman Empire, the first time they had seen an actual kind of emperor in 325 years. Keep in mind, America is only 242 years, okay, roughly, 243 maybe. The power of the church was established in political life. Like when the Pope crowned him, Pope Leo III crowned him, that showed that the Pope actually has the most authority. Because if you truly had all the authority, you would crown yourself, right? Because you're so powerful, you give yourself even more power, not somebody giving you power. It means that they had power in the first place. It's a symbol that has still resonated, to this day. You would see that kings are going to do that themselves if there still are kings, which there are some in some places. But the Roman culture was revived. Education and roads and the bureaucracy was set back up under Charlemagne. So he's pulling people out of this uneducated time, this disastrous purge-like era that they've been in for 325 years. Okay, he's this beaming light of hope, but unfortunately it doesn't last long. Episode 19 of Shankism. This has been the early Middle Ages, part 1. We talked about